I want you to try something the next time you walk past a mirror. Just kind of stop and really look at your reflection.
Yeah.
Look at the specific shape of your nose, the exact shade of your skin, the texture of your hair, even like the length of your arms relative to your torso. And usually when we do this, we just think about our immediate family, right? We think, oh, I have my mother's nose, or, I got my dad's height.
Right. Well, it is the most natural assumption in the world. I mean, we see the immediate inheritance right there in front of us.
But what if those features aren't just family traits? Like, what if the physical traits you see in the mirror are actually this living, breathing biological record of the atmospheric conditions that your ancient ancestors had to endure?
That perspective, I mean, it fundamentally changes how we view human biology.
That
When you look in the mirror through that lens, you aren't just seeing your parents. You're looking at a physical map of the sun, the cold, the rain, and the wind from, thousands or even tens of thousands of years ago.
And that is exactly our mission for this deep dive. We are looking at this massive stack of scientific sources today. We've got major genetic studies from PLOS Genetics, some modern physical anthropology, and even some brand new paleogenomic data that was actually just published this month in August 2026.
It's a great batch of research.
Yeah, it really is. And we're going to explore how weather and long-term climate fundamentally shaped human evolution. But before we get into all the crazy mechanisms, I think we need to draw a hard line between two concepts.
Definitely.
Because I think a lot of people hear this premise and they think, well, sure, I get a tan in the summer. Or, I shiver and get goosebumps when it snows. That's the weather changing me.
Right, and we have to separate those everyday reactions from what we're really talking about today.
Okay.
So getting a tan or shivering, that's called acclimatization or developmental plasticity.
Okay, acclimatization.
Yeah, those are short-term, temporary physical adjustments that your body makes just to handle the immediate environment. Like if you take a ski trip to the mountains in Colorado, the air is thinner, right?
Right.
So your body temporarily produces more red blood cells to carry oxygen.
But when I fly back down to sea level, that extra production just stops.
Exactly.
And I guess more importantly, I don't pass those extra red blood cells down to my kids just because I went skiing.
Right. That is the key distinction. Acclimatization is just a temporary physiological response. What we are exploring today is genetic evolution. We're talking about permanent, heritable changes that are written into a population's DNA.
And driven by natural selection.
Exactly. Over thousands of years, the climate acts as this relentless filter. So individuals who happen to carry genetic variations that make them, slightly better suited to survive and reproduce in a specific atmosphere, they pass those variations on.
And over millennia, the baseline biology of the entire population shifts.
It does.
So we're really looking at the long game here. And as we look at this DNA evidence, there is a common genetics myth that we should probably just clear up right at the top, just so we're all on the same page.
Yeah, it is vital we do that. We often hear the terms dominant and recessive thrown around, like as if they mean stronger and weaker genes.
Yeah, like a dominant gene physically overpowers a recessive one because it's superior or something.
Right, but that's not how it works. Dominance merely dictates which trait is expressed if you happen to inherit two different versions of a gene from your parents. It doesn't mean the dominant gene is evolutionarily better or even more common.
Right.
And furthermore, almost none of the traits we are discussing today are controlled by a single gene.
They're polygenic.
Yes, polygenic.
Meaning, it's not like there's one single nose shape switch in the human genome that just gets flipped.
No, not at all. Things like skin color, height, and facial structure, they are the result of countless genetic variants interacting together. I think it is better to think of it as a symphony. We aren't looking for a single climate gene playing a solo.
Right.
We're looking at massive, complex genetic shifts orchestrating a population's survival in a specific atmosphere.
And the end result of that evolutionary symphony is the central theme that we are going to keep coming back to today, which is that the human body can contain a biological record of ancestral atmospheric conditions.
It's beautifully put.
So let's start this biological journey in the deep past. Let's look at our tropical origins, because compared to our primate cousins, humans are incredibly weird creatures.
We really are the outliers of the primate world. In anthropological circles, humans are sometimes actually referred to as the sweaty ape.
Which is a terrible superhero name, by the way, but I guess incredibly accurate.
It perfectly describes our primary survival mechanism, Unlike chimpanzees or macaques, early hominins evolved a drastic reduction in body fur, and simultaneously we evolved an incredibly high density of eccrine sweat glands.
Okay, the crene sweat gland.
Yeah, we have these water-secreting glands covering almost our entire bodies. They reach densities of over 200 glands per square centimeter on places like our face and palms.
200. Our primate cousins have, what, like a fraction of that?
Roughly a tenth of the eccrine gland density we possess.
Wow.
So our ancestors made a massive evolutionary trade-off. Fur is fantastic for insulation because it traps a layer of stagnant air against the skin.
Right, keeps you warm.
But if you are a bipedal ape out foraging, walking, or running on a hot equatorial savanna, you are generating massive amounts of internal metabolic heat.
And if you're wearing a permanent fur coat, that metabolic heat has literally nowhere to go. You would just overheat and eventually collapse.
Exactly. So evolution found a workaround. The sources point to the regulation of a specific genetic switch called engrailed 1, or EN1. Think of it like a master control dial during fetal development.
So nature essentially turned the EN1 dial way down on fur production and turned it way up on sweat gland production.
That is a great way to visualize it. And by covering bare skin with millions of sweat glands, we unlocked a superpower, which is extreme evaporative cooling. The physical principle at play here is called latent heat flux.
Latent heat flux. Okay, let's break that down because that sounds like something out of a sci-fi warp drive. What is actually happening on the skin there?
It's just the physics of phase change. When your body secretes liquid water, so sweat onto the surface of your warm skin, that water needs energy to turn into a gas and evaporate.
Okay.
So it pulls that required heat energy directly from your blood that's circulating just beneath the skin.
Oh, wow.
And as the water vaporizes and flutes away, it literally carries your body heat into the atmosphere with it.
Which makes us the undisputed champions of the animal kingdom when it comes to cooling down on the move. Like, we can just keep running and sweating while fur-covered predators basically have to stop and pant.
Exactly. We can achieve thermally induced sweat rates 4 to 10 times higher than chimpanzees. We're sometimes secreting 1 liter or more of fluid per hour.
But wait, this brings up a huge contradiction. If losing our hair was this absolute masterstroke of cooling technology, why did we keep this thick patch of hair right on top of our heads? Like, that seems completely counterproductive if the whole goal is to shed insulation.
It does appear contradictory until you consider our posture and the specific angle of the sun.
Okay.
Because we walk upright, the top of our head takes the absolute brunt of incoming solar radiation. We desperately needed a sun shield. And there is some fascinating research from 2023 involving thermal mannequin experiments that illustrates exactly how this works.
Yes, the crash test dummy study. I love this one.
It's so clever.
They put these highly advanced heat-sensing mannequins in a climate-controlled chamber and literally put different types of wigs on them to see how heat moves through the hair.
The setup sounds completely absurd, but the data is striking. The experiments prove that tightly curled scalp hair minimizes solar heat gain far better than straight hair under the tested conditions.
But how? Because intuitively you'd think, thick curly hair would make you hotter. It seems like it would trap the heat.
Well, tightly curled hair acts as a structural buffer. So the curls sit on top of each other, and they create this thick layer of stagnant air between the intense solar radiation hitting the top of the hair and the actual surface of the scalp.
Oh, so it prevents the heat from conducting downwards into the skin.
Exactly.
And because that heat isn't hitting the scalp, the body doesn't have to sweat as much to cool the head down.
That is the crucial evolutionary benefit right there. By acting as a passive solar shield, tightly curled hair significantly reduces the amount of sweat the body has to produce just to offset the heat of the sun.
Wow.
And in a hot, arid environment, conserving vital water and electrolytes is literally the difference between life and death. The hair does the heavy lifting so the eccrine glands don't have to.
So we have bare skin to maximize the cooling breeze, and then a built-in sunshade on our heads to conserve water.
Right.
But the bare skin itself had to adapt too, didn't it? Because once you strip away the fur, you are exposing all that delicate skin to a massive barrage of ultraviolet radiation from the equatorial sun.
Yeah, and this brings us to skin pigmentation, which is perhaps the most universally recognized biological map of solar radiation on the human body.
Yeah.
Ancestral Homo sapiens evolved very dark, eumelanin-rich pigmentation.
And here's where the sources really surprised me, actually. Because the common assumption is that dark skin evolved to prevent sunburns or, to prevent skin cancer.
Yes.
But the evolutionary biologists say those factors actually have very little to do with it.
It's true. Sunburns are painful, and severe ones can certainly cause infection, but they generally don't prevent an organism from living long enough to reproduce.
Right.
And similarly, skin cancer is a terrible disease, but it typically develops much later in life, well past peak reproductive age.
Right. So in the cold calculus of natural selection, if a disease doesn't stop you from having children, it doesn't exert a strong pressure on the evolution of the species.
Exactly. The real invisible killer here is what the sun does to a specific nutrient in our blood.
This is wild to read.
Yeah, specifically what high ultraviolet A or UVA radiation does to folate.
Okay, let's explain folate for a second, because most people probably only know it from prenatal vitamin bottles.
Right. Well, folate or vitamin B9 is absolutely essential for cell division and DNA synthesis.
Right.
And it is especially critical during early pregnancy for the proper development of the fetal nervous system. A deficiency can lead to severe neural tube defects.
And what does UVA radiation actually do to it?
Well, UVA radiation penetrates relatively deeply into light, unprotected skin. And as it hits the blood vessels circulating in the dermis, the energy from the radiation literally shatters the folate molecules in the blood.
Oh my God.
It causes the photolysis, the light-induced destruction of this critical vitamin.
That is a terrifying mechanism. So you are this furless ape walking around under the intense equatorial sun, and the invisible rays of that sun are literally vaporizing a nutrient inside your veins that you desperately need to have healthy children.
It created an immense evolutionary pressure.
I bet.
The individuals who survived and successfully reproduced were the ones with genetic variations that produced high amounts of eumelanin.
Okay. Eumelanin is a dark pigment that acts as a physical barrier. It absorbs and scatters those UV photons near the surface of the skin before they can penetrate deeply enough to destroy the circulating folate.
So dark skin isn't just a shield against a sunburn. It is literally specialized reproductive armor designed to protect a single, highly vulnerable vitamin from solar radiation.
It is a profound adaptation to the atmospheric reality of the equator. But, the climate map on our bodies goes even deeper than our skin and hair.
Yeah.
It actually influences the overall geometry of our skeletons.
Oh, this gets into the physics of surface area, right? Like the classic ecogeography rules.
Yes, Allen's rule and Bergman's rule. These are principles that examine how populations adapt their body proportions to manage heat based on surface area to volume ratios.
So if we look at ancestral populations that lived in hot tropical climates for millennia, the fossil record and modern physical anthropology show a very specific body morphology.
They do.
They tended to evolve longer distal limbs, meaning longer forearms and lower legs, and narrower trunks. And it all comes back to heat dissipation. Think about a standard household radiator.
Okay.
It is designed with lots of fins and ridges, stretching the metal out as much as possible.
Right, to put more metal in contact with the air.
Exactly. A taller, narrower human body with elongated limbs operates on that exact same principle. It maximizes the amount of skin surface area relative to the overall volume of the body.
Okay.
And more surface area means more skin exposed to the air, which maximizes both convective heat loss and the evaporative cooling of sweat that we discussed earlier.
So you are basically stretching the body out to vent the heat?
Yes.
And in cold climates, the architecture just flips completely.
It has to. Populations with deep ancestral roots in extreme cold, like the Arctic or high latitudes, they tend to have wider trunks, greater body mass, and shorter distal limb segments.
So a more compact spherical body.
Right, because that minimizes surface area relative to volume. You are keeping the internal furnace warm and reducing the amount of skim that's exposed to the freezing air.
I do want to throw in a massive caveat from the sources here, though, because we cannot just look at a tall, slender person today walking down the street and declare, oh, your ancestors must be from a hot climate.
We absolutely cannot do that. Human stature and body geometry are incredibly complex traits. While long-term temperature was a major evolutionary pressure, it is heavily confounded by other things.
Like what?
Well, childhood nutrition, historical disease burdens, complex population migrations.
Right.
If a population experiences a century of famine or high disease load, their average height will decrease regardless of the temperature.
Oh, of course.
So while the broad ecogeographic patterns of Allen and Bergman definitely exist globally, we have to view body proportions as a tapestry of influences, not just a simple thermometer reading.
But it's still incredible to realize that, the length of my forearm is, at least in part, calibrated to the ambient temperature my ancient ancestors lived in.
It really is.
So we've built this incredibly efficient, hairless, sweating, dark-skinned runner that is perfectly suited for the equator. But humans are a restless species.
Very.
As our ancestors started walking north out of Africa into the dry, freezing air of Ice Age Europe and Asia, that equatorial biology suddenly became a massive liability. I mean, how does a body built to dump heat survive the freezing cold?
Well, as atmospheric conditions shifted, our biology had to undergo some radical redesigns. And one of the most fascinating redesigns happened right in the center of our faces.
The nose.
The nose.
I never thought of the nose as anything more than a way to smell coffee or, hold up my sunglasses. But the research from PLOS Genetics treats the human nose as a highly sophisticated HVAC system.
Because biologically, smelling is almost a secondary function.
Really?
The primary physiological job of your nasal cavity is to condition the air you breathe. The lungs are incredibly delicate tissues, so before the outside air hits them, your nose has to warm that air to core body temperature and saturate it to 100% humidity.
Wow. So if you are an early human inhaling freezing, bone-dry air in the middle of a glacial winter, your nose has to do a massive amount of heating and humidifying in a fraction of a second.
And the physical evidence shows that aspects of the external nose, specifically the nares width, which is the width of the nostrils, and the internal shape of the nasal cavity, they strongly correlate with the climate those ancestors inhabited.
Okay, explain the physics of this for me. How does a narrower nostril help warm up cold air?
It comes down to absolute humidity and airflow turbulence.
Okay.
In a cold, dry climate, evolution favored narrower nostrils. Think about putting your thumb over the end of a flowing garden hose.
Oh, the water sprays out wildly instead of flowing in a smooth stream.
Exactly. A narrower nasal opening forces the inspired air to become turbulent. Instead of rushing straight into the lungs in a smooth, direct column, the narrow opening makes the air bounce around chaotically inside the nasal cavity.
So it's forced to make extensive contact with the warm, moist mucosal walls and the bony structures inside your nose.
The turbinates.
Right.
Yes, the turbinates. It's forcing the air to take the long way through the heater.
That makes so much sense.
That turbulence maximizes the sensible heat exchange and moisture transfer. By the time the air navigates that turbulent path, it is warm and wet enough for the lungs.
And conversely, if your ancestors evolved in a warm, highly humid climate, the ambient air is already very close to optimal for lung function.
Right. It's a high vapor pressure environment. Under those conditions, aggressive conditioning isn't really necessary, and evolution favored wider nostrils, which allow for easier, less turbulent airflow.
The air is basically preconditioned.
Exactly. So the physical width of your nostrils is a direct biological response to the absolute humidity of the atmosphere your ancestors breathed.
That is the ultimate atmospheric map on the body.
Yeah.
But temperature and humidity weren't the only things changing as humans marched away from the equator. They also faced a drastic reduction in solar radiation.
The sun gets noticeably weaker at higher latitudes, especially during the long winters. And this created an existential crisis for those early migrating humans carrying that dark, eumelanin-rich skin.
Because the shield that saved them at the equator suddenly became a barrier to something they desperately needed.
It is a brutal evolutionary trade-off. Dark skin protected folate from ultraviolet A. But the human body also requires a different wavelength of sunlight, ultraviolet B or UVB, to actually penetrate the skin in order to synthesize vitamin D.
And vitamin D is non-negotiable for human survival.
It is required for calcium absorption, bone growth, immune function. If a developing child does not synthesize enough vitamin D, they develop severe bone deformities like rickets.
Oof.
And in ancestral environments, a deformed pelvis from rickets meant a woman would likely die during childbirth. The evolutionary penalty for low vitamin D was absolute.
So these populations moving north are suddenly in environments where the weak winter UVB rays simply cannot penetrate their dark skin.
Yeah.
They literally can't make the vitamin.
So the selective pressure flipped completely. The environment was no longer demanding a shield against the sun. It was demanding a solar panel that could catch every scarce photon of UVB available.
Wow.
Consequently, populations that migrated to higher latitudes underwent intense natural selection for depigmented or lighter skin.
And one of the most interesting details in the genetic data is that this didn't just happen once. It wasn't like a single mutation that just spread everywhere. Populations in Europe and populations in East Asia evolved lighter skin completely independently, using entirely different genetic pathways.
That's right. This is a classic hallmark of convergent evolution.
Okay.
When different populations face the exact same intense environmental pressure in this case, low UVB environments, natural selection will often find different genetic solutions to solve the same problem.
But hold on, most environments aren't a monolith, right?
Right.
Think about somewhere in the mid-latitudes, like the Mediterranean or, parts of North America. It might be freezing and dark in December, but blazing hot and sunny in July.
Yes.
How does evolution hardwire a solution for a problem that flips every 6 months?
Well, it evolved one of the most brilliant biological compromises we have, which is facultative pigmentation.
Which is the scientific term for the ability to tan.
Exactly. Tanning is not just aesthetic.
Yeah.
It is a highly sophisticated dynamic adaptation to environments with drastic seasonal shifts in UV radiation.
Okay.
In the winter, when UVB is scarce, the skin remains relatively depigmented to maximize vitamin D production.
Right.
But when summer arrives and UV radiation ramps up, threatening folate levels once again, the skin darkens in response to the exposure.
Wait, so when someone gets a tan, their body is literally running a seasonal software update to handle shifting atmospheric radiation.
Basically, yes.
That entirely changes how I view summer. It's a real-time climate adaptation happening in a matter of days.
It is a dynamic biological response system perfectly tuned to seasonal atmospheric changes.
Okay, so we have rock-solid evolutionary logic for skin color, nose shape, sweating, body proportions. But this is where I actually want to push back a little bit.
Okay, let's hear it.
Because you hear a lot of other climate theories out there. Like, what about the snow goggles theory for the epicanthic fold? You see the skin fold of the upper eyelid in many East Asian and Arctic populations. And the prevailing wisdom I've always heard is that it evolved to protect the eyes from blinding snow glare or, freezing winds.
I have to push back firmly on that narrative.
Really?
Yes, the sources are very clear that we must maintain scientific uncertainty here. The snow goggles theory is popular folklore, but the developmental genetics do not confidently support it.
But it makes so much intuitive sense. I mean, if you are hunting in the Arctic, snow blindness is a real threat. A physical shield over the eye seems like a perfect adaptation.
I know, but intuitive logic is often a trap in evolutionary biology.
Huh.
Just because a trait seems useful for a specific environment doesn't mean it evolved because of that environment. For example, we see epicanthic folds in populations far removed from snow or extreme cold, such as certain groups in southern Africa, like the San people.
Oh, it's a good point.
The population history and developmental genetics of eye morphology are incredibly complex.
What about red hair and blue eyes? Weren't those specifically adapted for the cloudy, overcast climates of Northern Europe?
Again, we have to separate rigorously proven adaptations from just so evolutionary stories.
Just so stories, yeah.
While we know positive selection occurred on eye color and hair color loci, claiming blue eyes specifically evolved as a climate adaptation for low light is totally unproven.
Really?
It is just as likely to be a result of sexual selection, genetic drift, or pleiotropy.
Pleiotropy, what is that?
Pleiotropy is when one genetic variant influences multiple, seemingly unrelated physical traits.
Oh.
So it's entirely possible that the gene variants causing blue eyes or red hair were just along for the ride.
Along for the ride.
Yeah, perhaps they were genetically linked to a different, much more crucial adaptation, like an immune response or a metabolic function. And the visible trait, the blue eyes, might just be a side effect.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah.
We shouldn't force a climate explanation onto every single feature.
Right.
But there's one environment where the climate explanation is undeniable, and the adaptation is just staggering, and that's high altitude.
Absolutely. High-altitude evolution is one of the most stunning examples of localized human adaptation.
Yeah.
When populations migrated to the Tibetan Plateau or the Andean Altiplano or the Ethiopian highlands, they encountered an atmospheric pressure unlike anything at sea level.
Drastically low oxygen partial pressure.
Exactly. The air is quite literally thinner. Every breath pulls in fewer oxygen molecules.
And for a human adapted to sea level, this causes severe hypoxia. Your body's immediate acclimatization response is to panic and just produce massive amounts of red blood cells to try and capture whatever scarce oxygen is available.
It's like trying to run a marathon while breathing through a straw. And your body's panic response is to just jam the bloodstream with so many red blood cells that it creates a physiological traffic jam.
And over time, that overproduction makes the blood dangerously viscous, right?
Yeah.
Leading to chronic mountain sickness and cardiovascular failure. Like, it's unsustainable.
It is. But populations that have lived at these extreme altitudes for millennia have evolved distinct genetic pathways to bypass this traffic jam. For example, Tibetan populations show highly selected variants in genes like EPAS1 and EGLN1.
What are those genes doing differently?
They alter the body's entire hypoxia response pathway.
Right.
Instead of triggering the endless overproduction of red blood cells, these genetic adaptations allow Tibetans to maintain normal blood viscosity while somehow utilizing and transporting oxygen far more efficiently at the cellular level.
Wow.
They fundamentally rewired how their bodies handle atmospheric gas.
That's a perfect example of a deep, localized adaptation. But everything we've talked about so far, moving north, climbing mountains, it feels like a slow, steady march.
It does.
But the climate isn't always stable. Sometimes the atmosphere delivers a massive, rapid shock to the system.
Yes, and climate shocks are where evolution stops being a gentle nudge and becomes a brutal, unforgiving filter.
And this brings us to some brand new data. I want to talk about the invisible cold adaptations locked in our cells. The sources highlight a specific cold-sensing genetic variant in a receptor called TRPM8.
TRPM8 is a fascinating gene. It encodes a receptor that actually detects cold temperatures on your skin.
And the prevalence of this genetic variant is wild. The data shows it is found in only about 5% of the population in Nigeria, but it rises to nearly 88% of the population in Finland.
It's a stark genetic divide driven directly by latitude and cold exposure. But the adaptation to cold goes far deeper than just sensing it. This is where the August 2026 paleogenomic research becomes so crucial. Researchers analyzed the ancient DNA of the Junman people.
They were an ancient hunter-gatherer population in eastern Eurasia, right?
Yes, and they lived through the extreme cold of the last glacial maximum, the absolute peak of the Ice Age. And the ancient DNA revealed clear signatures of intense genetic selection, not just for body shape, but for how their bodies literally burned calories to stay alive.
The sources mentioned a process called non-shivering thermogenesis.
Shivering is a very inefficient way to generate heat. It burns through muscle energy rapidly.
Right? You get exhausted.
Exactly. Non-shivering thermogenesis relies on a highly specialized tissue called brown adipose tissue, or brown fat. Unlike regular white fat, which stores calories, brown fat acts like a cellular furnace.
Yeah.
It burns lipids fats specifically to generate heat without any muscle contraction.
And the researchers found that the Junman people had highly selected variants in genes like UCP1, FTO, and APOA5. How do those genes operate the furnace?
UCP1 is the crucial one. It creates a protein that literally uncouples the cellular machinery inside the mitochondria.
Uncouples it.
Normally, cells break down food to create ATP, which is usable cellular energy. UCP1 acts as a bypass valve. It tells the cells stop making usable energy and just burn these fat molecules to release pure heat.
Wow, just pure heat.
The Junman population underwent intense natural selection to ramp up this lipid metabolism just to survive the freezing Ice Age environment.
But there is a massive catch to this in the modern world, isn't there?
Yes, a phenomenon called evolutionary mismatch.
Mismatch.
These genetic variants were brilliant life-saving adaptations when you were a hunter-gatherer trying to stay warm during a glacial winter. But if you carry these deeply ancestral lipid metabolism variants today, and you live in a modern climate-controlled environment...
And you're consuming a high-calorie Western diet.
Exactly, the body gets confused.
It leads to severe metabolic issues, obesity, and diabetes.
Because the genetic engine is still aggressively trying to hoard and burn fat for a brutal winter that never arrives.
It's a physiological echo of an ice age causing disease in the 21st century. That's incredible.
Yeah.
But the cold isn't the only extreme shock. I also want to make sure we mention the Inuit populations, because they live in a similarly extreme Arctic environment, but their adaptations are slightly different.
The Inuit present phenomenal case study because they highlight the intersection of climate and diet.
Right.
The Inuit have highly selected variants in genes like TBX15 and WARS2.
Are those also for brown fat furnaces?
They are involved in fat metabolism, but the evolutionary driver here is nuanced. While the extreme Arctic cold played a major role, evolutionary biologists believe an equally powerful force was dietary adaptation. To survive in the Arctic, the Inuit historically consumed a diet incredibly high in marine polyunsaturated fatty acids, whale blubber, seal fat, fish.
Because you can't exactly farm wheat on the tundra.
Precisely. Their bodies had to genetically adapt to process massive amounts of marine fats without suffering cardiovascular collapse.
Wow.
So when we look at the Inuit, we're seeing a genetic map of both the freezing climate and the extreme diet that climate forced them to adopt.
So climate can force a dietary adaptation.
Yeah.
Can it also force internal water conservation? Because we see extreme heat shocks too, like deep deserts.
Look at the recent research on the Turkana people in northwest Kenya. They inhabit a brutally hot, hyper-arid desert environment. And the research focused on a specific gene called STC1.
What does STC1 do?
It is directly involved in kidney dehydration physiology.
Okay.
When a normal person gets severely dehydrated, the kidneys struggle to concentrate urine and conserve water. The Turkana population has a highly selected variant of the STC1 gene that essentially supercharges the kidney's ability to filter and hoard water at the cellular level under severe heat and aridity stress.
So they are genetically optimized to pull every last drop of water back into the bloodstream before it's lost.
Exactly. It proves that persistent extreme aridity can drive rapid, localized evolution for internal organ function, not just external traits like sweating.
Now, when we talk about climate shaping our biology, we also have to talk about how it acts indirectly. Because the weather doesn't just dictate how hot we are or how much water we need, it dictates who else can live in our environment.
You are referring to climate-mediated pathogens. And this is arguably one of the most ruthless evolutionary forces in human history.
The prime example being malaria.
Malaria is a devastating disease caused by a blood parasite. But that parasite cannot move on its own. It relies entirely on the Anopheles mosquito to act as a vector.
Right.
And mosquitoes are completely at the mercy of the climate. They require high precipitation and warm temperatures to breed and thrive.
So if you look at a global weather map of heavy rainfall and high heat, you are effectively looking at a map of mosquito habitats.
Which becomes a map of malaria. And because malaria has been killing humans for millennia, it ultimately becomes a map of human genetics.
Wow.
In these hot, highly precipitous regions, the evolutionary pressure of malaria was so intense that it drove severe natural selection for genetic mutations that altered the very architecture of human red blood cells.
This is where we see the rise of the sickle cell trait. Explain how a collapsed blood cell actually fights off a parasite. What's the mechanism there?
Well, when the malaria parasite enters a normal, healthy red blood cell, it uses the cell's machinery to replicate itself until the cell bursts open, spreading the infection.
Okay.
But if you carry the sickle cell trait, your red blood cells have an abnormal hemoglobin structure. So when the parasite enters a sickle cell, it causes the cell to collapse, or sickle, into a crescent shape.
And that traps the parasite.
It does more than trap it. The sickling causes the cell to leak potassium, which creates a highly hostile internal environment. The parasite simply cannot replicate.
Oh.
Furthermore, the spleen recognizes the misshapen cell and destroys it, parasite and all.
That is an incredibly aggressive cellular defense mechanism.
It is an incredible survival advantage in a high malaria environment, provided you only inherit one copy of the gene.
Right, because if two parents with the trait have a child, and that child inherits two copies of the sickle cell gene, they develop sickle cell anemia, which is a debilitating and often fatal disease.
A brutal evolutionary compromise. Evolution is blind. It only cares about immediate survival. But it perfectly illustrates indirect climate mapping.
Yeah.
High rainfall and heat supported the mosquitoes delivered the parasite, and the parasite permanently altered the cellular geometry of the human genome. Our blood holds an indirect biological map of ancient rainfall patterns.
So when these massive disruptions hit a sudden ice age, a brutal localized drought, a surge in rainfall bringing malaria, how fast does evolution actually operate? Because we always picture evolution as this incredibly slow process taking millions of years.
This touches on the dynamics of sudden population bottlenecks. When an abrupt climate shock hits, say, a sudden, centuries-long megadrought, it doesn't just gently push a population toward adaptation, it decimates them.
The population crashes.
Exactly. The vast majority perish. The few who do survive are the statistical outliers who happen to carry beneficial genetic variants like the STC1 water conservation variant or the UCP1 brown fat variant.
Yeah.
When the climate eventually stabilizes and the survivors repopulate, the entire genetic makeup of that new group has been drastically and rapidly altered.
Because everyone is descending from the tiny pool of survivors with that specific DNA.
We call this intense natural selection coupled with genetic drift. Furthermore, extreme climate shocks force people to migrate.
Right.
They flee the drought or the advancing ice, move into new territories, and encounter other populations. They mix a process called admixture.
Okay, so that shares entirely new genetic variants across groups.
Exactly. So abrupt climate disruptions accelerate evolution by crushing populations, forcing migrations, and completely reshuffling the genetic deck of the survivors.
Okay, so we've tracked the human body from the deep tropical past, through global migrations, and through the brutal shocks of ice ages and droughts. That brings us to the present day. And this is where I actually want to push back on the entire premise of climate-driven evolution.
Oh, all right. Let's hear it.
In the modern world, I can board a flight in freezing, snow-covered Helsinki and step off the plane into the sweltering heat of Nairobi 10 hours later. We have unprecedented global migration. People from entirely different ancestral climate zones are intermarrying every day.
Very true.
And more importantly, we have technology. We have air conditioning, central heating, moisture-wicking fabrics. We basically live our entire lives in perfectly climate-controlled boxes. Isn't human climate-driven evolution officially over? Have we insulated ourselves from natural selection?
It is the defining question of modern anthropology. The short answer is no. Evolution is never over. But the mechanisms have drastically shifted.
Okay.
What you are describing with airplanes and unprecedented intermarriage is called global gene flow.
Meaning the DNA from all these geographically isolated, climate-adapted populations is now mixing in a global blender.
Yes. And it is absolutely true that massive global gene flow weakens local, geographically distinct differentiation. It is much harder for a specific nose shape to evolve uniquely in one isolated mountain valley if the people in that valley are constantly intermarrying with people who fly in from tropical coastal regions. The hyperlocal genetic signals get blurred.
So we aren't going to see those highly distinct, localized adaptations evolve anymore.
Not in the same isolated manner we did in the deep past. However, gene flow acts as an incredible biological distribution network.
What do you mean?
Well, think about all the potent adaptations we've discussed today. The high-capacity sweating efficiency, the Turkana kidney water conservation, the Tibetan altitude resistance. These are incredibly useful genetic tools.
And because of global migration, those tools are no longer isolated. They are being distributed throughout the broader human population.
The genetic toolkit of the entire human species is expanding and being shared, which is critical because our climate is changing more rapidly now than at almost any point in human history.
Which brings us to the future. We are looking at a century with significantly higher global temperatures, unprecedented extreme heat waves, and drastically shifting rainfall patterns. If the climate is still a filter, what parts of our modern biology are going to be tested? Like, what will tomorrow's climate select for?
Well, if recurrent, lethal extreme heat events begin to consistently affect survival, especially among vulnerable populations or in regions without access to that air conditioning you mentioned, we could see selection for enhanced cellular heat tolerance.
Okay.
We might see selection for greater sweating efficiency.
But we already sweat more than almost anything on Earth. Could we sweat more?
It might not be about sweating more, but sweating smarter. Selection might favor better electrolyte conservation so humans don't cramp, suffer cardiac events, and fail under sustained heat stress.
Oh, that makes sense.
We might see the wider distribution and selection of improved kidney water handling variants, drawing on those Turkana genes.
And what about the indirect effects, like the pathogens?
That is perhaps the most immediate threat. As climate zones shift toward the poles, the habitable zones for pathogens like the mosquitoes carrying malaria or ticks carrying Lyme disease shift with them.
Right, they follow the weather.
We could face severe new selective pressures for climate-mediated disease resistance in populations that have never historically encountered those diseases.
And what happens to the adaptations we don't need anymore? Like the Juman brown fat engine.
As the planet warms, those deeply ancestral cold climate adaptations will likely experience what we call relaxed selection.
Relaxed selection.
Traits that were once vital for survival during an ice age may slowly drift out of the population if they are no longer needed, especially since they carry heavy metabolic penalties in a modern dietary environment.
It's staggering to realize that the evolution of our bodies is still an active, ongoing dialogue with the atmosphere. We are not a finished biological product.
We are just the current draft.
We have covered so much ground today. From the EN1 gene turning us into hairless, sweaty apes, to tightly curled hair acting as a physical shield against solar radiation.
Yeah.
We've seen how absolute humidity dictated the turbulence in our nostrils, and how the invisible rays of UVA radiation and the desperate need for vitamin D played a thousands of years tug-of-war with our skin pigmentation.
It has a lot.
We've looked at the Ice Age furnace of brown fat, the water-hoarding kidneys of the desert, and the malarial map etched into our blood cells.
And through all of that complexity, the central theme remains entirely intact.
It absolutely does. The next time you look in the mirror, you have to realize you are not just looking at a reflection of your parents or your grandparents. You are looking at a living, breathing, biological record of ancestral atmospheric conditions. You are wearing a physical map of the sun, the cold, the rain, and the wind that your ancestors managed to survive.
It is a legacy written in your DNA by the climate itself.
I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over. We spent this entire deep dive seeing exactly how the brutal environments of the deep past molded our bodies. We are the survivors of ancient weather. But given how rapidly and drastically the Earth's atmosphere is shifting today, if yesterday's climate helped shape the humans we are today, what might tomorrow's climate eventually make of us?